This week on Staying in My Lane podcast, I thought it would be helpful because after talking to some friends, I kind of had the same response from three different people talking about difficult people, people who think that they know everything, difficult coworkers, difficult family members. How do we deal with these difficult people? When dealing with people who think that they know everything or think that they may not be wrong, the best approach is to really remain calm and actively listen to their perspective and avoid getting into arguments. That's really hard, right? With people who want to be heard, sometimes it's easy for them to, send multiple messages in a row, which I've been guilty of myself, or call excessively until they get that attention. But I think it's important to politely redirect the conversation or redirect the person and excuse yourself if necessary from a situation that makes you feel tense. If you're not ready to talk in the moment, a good way to go about excusing yourself is to say that you're not ready and to set a timer, have a limit, collect your thoughts, and just really take time for you. Don't take it personally and understand that their behavior might stem from insecurities or a need to feel superior. So don't let that affect your self-esteem. Another way is to ask clarifying questions and listen attentively. Even if we disagree with the person that we're talking to, actively listen to what they're saying and try to understand their viewpoint. If something is unclear or you don't understand, ask an open-ended question to encourage further explanation. And don't be afraid to, if you're confused or if you don't understand or if you feel that there is some tension, use those I statements. Hey, I'm not sure what's being said right now. Can you explain it to me? Gently redirect that conversation. If the discussion becomes unproductive, steer it towards a different topic, or that's where you take that break. And, people who feel insecure or people who feel superior, validate that part of their perspective when appropriate, even if you don't agree with the whole point. You can also use humor strategically, of course, because, a lighthearted comment can sometimes diffuse a tense situation, but be really mindful and not to come across in that condescending, disrespectful way. And then, of course, having those boundaries with a person who's constantly thinking they're right, constantly seeking that validation, constantly seeking that attention. If someone's constantly interrupting you or dominating the conversation, clearly state what you need. If it's a close relationship in a situation where you do feel comfortable to talk to someone, you could gently point out their behavior and suggest that they consider other perspectives. And I really advise you to be gentle and mindful with your words. And if it impacts your professional setting, if there's someone who has a know-it-all attitude that hinders collaboration, that's when I would suggest to address it professionally with a supervisor or an administrator. When dealing with difficult coworkers, you can determine whether interacting with that coworker is a priority or if you need to take a step back. Set a goal for that interaction. Only speak to them if there's someone else around so that you don't get pulled into conversation that feels really negative and toxic. And understand that the circumstances and perspectives of the coworker may be different than you, and they may deal with things in a different way or seek that validation or interaction differently than you. Speak out and voice your thoughts, of course, in a respectful way. Don't ever make anybody feel inferior or feel diminished as a person. And that just really means, being genuine and empathetic and encouraging that healthy collaboration in the workplace. Focus on your own work and performance. When we go to work, we are there to work. And of course, we have relationships with coworkers, and there are different settings where that collaboration and that friendship really is stronger than other places. So know that it's okay to focus on yourself. It's okay to distance yourself from someone who's feeling negative or tries to pull you into a negative conversation. That all goes back to that gossip, right? We don't want to get drug into conversations that can come back on us later. And, if they're discussing someone who's not in the room, politely say, hey, that person's not here right now, and I don't feel comfortable talking about this. It all comes back to setting those boundaries and really finding what works for you, what makes you feel secure. And when we think about professional settings, there is a standard that comes with that, whether there's a code of ethics that you have to follow or, workplace rules or expectations. Really keep that in the back of your mind when you're talking in any situation in your workplace. Will this come back on me later? Will a supervisor or an administrator hear this, and what will they think? And it's really important to, especially when you work in places as hospitals or police departments, fire departments, social work, think about that confidentiality piece. You need to make sure that you keep the conversation appropriate and set those boundaries where you don't talk about something that could ever damage or hinder your ability to move forward, especially when you want to make those promotions and you want to have a good reputation in the workplace. You really have to know those limits and those boundaries. There are 3 types of difficult coworkers. The first one is the pessimist, and what this looks like is someone who's really negative and can't find the joy, and it's always complaining, always making it about themselves, and it just makes it really negative to be around that person. A pessimist can be motivated by anxiety or a desire for power and have resentment for how they've been treated in the past, so they take that out on the people that are around them. And regardless why a pessimist acts this way, it's important to find ways to productively work with this person because after all, we are at work, so we can't pick and choose who we work with. Tactics that are helpful to try when working with pessimists is to acknowledge their complaints and then reframe them. And reframing is really powerful. For instance, if the pessimist is like grumbling about another team member, oh, this person is lazy, or they don't want to do their work, say something like, it's a busy time for everyone. I bet they're doing more than we can see. And just leave it at that. Don't be patronizing or mean, and just present that alternative view and kind of twist their negativity into a positive thing and see what happens. The goal is to increase that sense of acknowledging their feelings and really giving them that validation. Use their outlook as a positive tool. So if your colleague is a natural at pointing out risks or negatives, twist it to be a positive, and you can say things like, oh my gosh, thank you for letting me know. It's kind of playing that devil's advocate who you can raise difficult questions and challenge their thinking by giving them that positivity back. And some phrases that are really helpful to use when working with a pessimist is, you are so good at identifying the downsides. What might we be missing here? Are you able to give any insight as to how we can make this better? I think that's really powerful. The next difficult coworker would be the passive-aggressive peer coworker who looks like someone who displays negative body language but insists that everything is fine. And a lot of times when you hear those people, you'll ask them how their day is and they will say, oh, it's fine. I'm okay. But they make insults that sounds like compliments. So what can we do with those passive-aggressive coworkers? We can avoid labeling them as passive-aggressive. It is so tempting, you guys, it is so tempting to call out behavior directly, but saying, stop being so passive-aggressive will only make things worse. It's a loaded response, and it's rare that someone would be willing to accept and own up to such behavior, especially in a professional setting. So more likely, calling them out will only make them more angry and more defensive, which will lead to further problems, right? So instead, try using strategies that can help you understand their perspective better, like focusing on the underlying message, not only their behavior. Seek to understand. Seek to understand what your colleague really is trying to say. What is that underlying idea that they're attempting to convey, even if it's wrapped up in a snarky comment, okay? We all have those people who we work with who sound sarcastic or sound rude or sound grumpy. And there may not be an intention behind that. But if you can focus on your coworkers' underlying concerns or questions rather than the way that they're expressing themselves, you may be able to find the positive and address the actual problem. The next thing that can be really helpful when working with someone who's passive aggressive is creating that safe environment for an honest conversation. Show interest in their conversation, show interest in their perspective, no matter how hard it may be for you to hear. You might say, I heard your views during the meeting and I interpret it as blank. Did I get that right? The advantage to opening up a conversation with someone is that it allows that person to label their own behavior and emotions. If your colleague acknowledges how they're actually feeling, although there's never a guarantee that they will, you're one step closer to breaking that habit and breaking that line that's drawn of responding passive aggressively back to them. Some phrases that might work with passive aggressive coworkers are, hey, I heard that you, and this is where you give a summary of something that you heard, but I wasn't sure if you meant something else. Is there something that I'm not understanding? That really gives them that power to explain themselves or clarify any misunderstandings. Another one is, hey, I noticed you pushed away from the table or rolled your eyes. What's your reaction to this discussion and how are you feeling? Asking someone how they're feeling and letting them have that power and really creates a sense of purpose for them to give back what they want to say. Another one is, I've noticed that you haven't been responding to my emails. Is there something that I did wrong? And I don't mean to pry, but I just want to make sure everything's okay. And be genuine about it. Don't do something out of being fake or putting on a facade to ask somebody how they're feeling, because that's not a nice thing to do. And it only is going to come back on you in the professional setting and potentially the personal setting as well. The last type of coworker who may be difficult is the know-it-all. And we kind of talked about that a little bit, but confidence can be a good thing, but confidence without competence, do you hear that? Confidence without competence can cause people to ignore feedback and act conceited, or even take credit for group success or someone else's success. Some know-it-alls have adopted this demeanor to compensate feelings of insecurity. For others, behavior has been encouraged by those corporate norms of agencies or organizations. Either way, they can undermine that cohesiveness and that collaborative sense of working together to the point of that it could damage your career. So tactics to try when working with someone who is a know-it-all is to address those interpretations and those interruptions. One way to avoid interruptions is to request that people refrain from interjecting. Before you start talking, explain how much time you'll need. Something like, please hold any comments or questions until I'm done. Or if you're not making a formal presentation, but you're just having a discussion where there's some back and forth that's expected, there's some back and forth conversation, you might say, interruptions break my concentration. So I would really appreciate it if I could finish my thoughts before you say something. Ask for specific facts. I think it's important to acknowledge that we all have our own opinions. We all have our own interpretations of things. So another habit of the know-it-all is to proclaim that they have knowledge of things with no way of knowing for sure. So in a year, no one will ever be talking about this. When this happens, understand that it is totally okay to ask people for sources or research data to back that up, but be respectful and not confrontational. It is really important to remember that when you're in a professional setting, keeping your composure and remembering that the way you respond is always being watched. A great way to remember this is to say things and practice saying things like, tell me more about where your insights are coming from, and really listen, actively listen to your coworker, whether they are the know-it-all coworker or not. Model that humility. Many show-offs act the way they do because that insecurity may be there, but it's really important to provide a different model by displaying that humility and being open-minded. Try saying things like, I don't know, or I don't have that information right now. Let me get back to you. And just really try to be that positive coworker that doesn't seem confrontational and doesn't seem rude, because whatever we say, and this is just in everyday life, not just professional setting, but whatever you do, whatever you say, however you act, can always come back on you. And even though we grow, even though we evolve and make changes, it's important to remember that what we do can have lasting impacts and it can come back on us. What we say and the tone that we say it in can be damaging to someone. And really taking a look at how we present ourselves in the professional setting and in everyday life, because sometimes those professional settings overlap or interfere with our personal lives. And, it's really important to be consistent and really important to be genuine. So the next topic is difficult family members. This is a hard one, right? We are so pushed in society to have relationships with our families, have relationships with people that may not always be good for our mental health, but society says, hey, you need to have a relationship with your, mother or your brother or your aunt or your uncle or your grandma. And that may not always feel good. There are different types of family members who are difficult. They include the critic, who is always ready with a negative comment or judgment, kind of seeming that negative feeling and just wants everybody else to feel negative. The manipulator, who uses guilt, emotional blackmail, or shame to control others. The drama queen or king, who thrives on conflict and creates that chaos within a family unit. The narcissist, who's that self-centered, lacking empathy for others type of person. And the enabler, who supports or covers up destructive behaviors out of the fear of judgment, protecting other family members who may make their family look bad. Not getting along with a family member may strain other familial relationships, making it really hard to separate oneself entirely. Trying to fix a difficult family member can be impossible. You guys, it's not our job to fix somebody. And the more we make demands on someone, the more difficult it makes to have that relationship and to have that connection. It's really important to recognize and stop an interaction with a difficult family member when it's no longer about solution. It's only about winning. And that's hard because difficult people are everywhere. We find them in everyday lives and everyday interactions. So what are some ways that we can cope with a difficult family member or even a difficult friend? Not trying to fix the difficult person. We have to understand that we cannot change anyone. They have to change themselves. And, there are some things that can be very damaging, qualities and traits that people may possess that are very unhealthy and toxic, but we can accept them exactly as they are. This applies to all difficult people and not just family. It's really tempting to try to help someone who you care about and make some efforts to help them change. But sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Often your efforts will not be rewarded. In fact, trying to fix someone or make their life better may become a really big stressor in your own life, and that's just not good for your mental health. I think encouraging difficult people to express themselves gives them that sense of power. It gives them that control that they're looking for and validates their feelings. Let them fully state their point of view about an issue, a conflict, a concern, or a problem with interpretation. Why do they feel judged or criticized by others? And what do they feel people misunderstand about them? What do they expect from others? How do they feel in that moment? The idea is to remain as neutral as possible, just listening, using active listening. Rather than trying to engage, it may be enough to allow someone to feel like they have that opportunity to speak freely and say what's on their mind. And this is really important to show that respect and show that grace that we can give people to be their authentic self, be who they want to be. But know that there are some topics that are completely off limits. Watch for those trigger topics. There will obviously be topics that are triggering and represent points of disagreement or disharmony among families. Know what these topics are and be extremely aware and present when these are brought up. Your past experiences should help you, but especially when you're confronted with those delicate conversations or sensitive topics, Address these in a non-confrontational way or deflect from the conflict if the atmosphere becomes too heated or too stressful or tense. And just know that some topics are absolutely off limits. There may be things that you can't talk about. And rather than forcing that conversation, just avoid the discussion until a time when both people or both parties are willing to move forward in a way that is positive and constructive. I will say, difficult people, it's not about you, usually. Yes, of course, it's hard to take things not personally, and especially when you're attacked or made to feel responsible for someone else. But when you look at the anatomy of a conflict, let's really look at that anatomy. You can see how these play out. Notice how people progressively move through a discussion or an argument. Usually it initiates around the center of a topic or discussion, disagreement, or response that made the person upset. If this is allowed to continue, the argument or disagreement may become heated and can accelerate to personal attacks very quickly, which often we'll regret later. We don't want to say something in the heat of the moment that's going to cause or inflict pain on someone, but we do. We're human. And if you've been through this kind of interaction before, or you're going through this now, make an effort to imagine it unfolding before it actually does, and then nip it in the bud really quick. Don't fall into traps of arguing with someone who does not see a problem with their actions. Your own well-being comes first. While you want to be respectful and attentive to others as much as you can do that, you don't want to bend over backwards or be used or taken advantage of just to make someone else happy. Never allow or give anyone the power to have a personal interaction with you or take advantage of you in a way where it infringes upon or challenges your well-being. Visualize those boundaries, remind yourself of those boundaries and that protective territory between you and someone else. No one at all is entitled to occupy your space unless you invite them in. And then there's that special situation, where families are getting together for a holiday or a special occasion. And when you find yourself in that position, it's best to plan ahead or have a plan in place of how time will be spent. And don't leave too much unplanned time. You want structure. You want to have a set schedule because you don't want to get into a situation where you're left alone with someone who is a difficult family member or a difficult coworker or a difficult friend with whom you have an issue or conflict. Someone who is confrontational or challenge incites violence or aggravation and can come off emotionally abrasive. Someone who basically likes to push your buttons, or even if it's not intentional. You need to surround yourself with people who you get along with. Just be around people who make you feel happy. You don't have to be around a coworker outside of work. You don't have to be around a family member outside of a family function. One thing that really helps me is when I'm around people who make me nervous or cause me anxiety or I feel like I'm walking on eggshells, is to really notice where I feel that tension and that anxiety in my body. Do I feel it in my head? Do I feel it in my stomach? Do I feel on edge because of my own insecurities, or are they really a difficult person? Whether it's one answer or another, you just have to really find what works for you and find what makes you comfortable. There is no law or no rule that tells you have to have difficult people in your life. And sometimes difficult people are going through really hard things. So it's just important to remember that we can't change anybody and we never know what someone else is experiencing. So just giving them that grace, but also being able to set those boundaries, those firm boundaries, guys. I really want to say that. Firm boundaries are important in any relationship and doing what's best for your mental health. I really hope this conversation helped clear up some ways to deal with difficult people, whether it's at work, whether it's at home, whether it's at a cousin's birthday party or at a family Christmas. I'm going to go take some time for self-care, and I advise you to do the same. If you have any questions or you have any feedback, reach out to me. Until next time. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only. This does not reflect anything that's going on in my personal life. However, some of the experiences I share can be relatable, but this does not directly reflect any social work advice, any professional advice. This is just simply to have conversation. As always, thank you for listening, and I will see you later.